If I said to you, I think I repeated that in the first video, but it's worth keep repeating for every video. If I said to you that physicists are plumbers who do not understand what water is, what would you say? You would say physicists are Nobel Prize winning geniuses, they're always right, I'm the idiot. Well, that would make you a cultist, somebody who doesn't want to look at evidence but believes that their gurus are absolutely right. Or would you say, why are you such an arrogant claimist? Why are you making such an arrogant claim? Prove it. Right, let me show you. This is another one of the problems that we have. Again, just to recap, two sides to physics: Newtonian physics, natural philosophy. Newton's a natural philosopher. He looks at the universe first, he looks at reality as he perceives it, and then he tries to explain it, and using mathematics and observations tries to justify and show us what might be happening. On this side we have quantum physics, who are dominated for a long time by pure mathematicians. These are people who believe that mathematics is a God-given thing. It is a magical engine where you put in the parameters and it always delivers perfect truth. So let me just get this. And we blindly braille read the universe. So if I asked you that there are lots of problems, everybody knows there are problems in physics where the two halves don't match at all, where would you think the problems would be? Here, where we can see first and then try and explain, or here, where we see nothing and just keep going blindly? Obviously, I think you'll agree with me that the problems should be here. But are they though? Charge theory madness. Everybody, the very first thing you learn at school at O levels is charge theory. This is muddy boots that have remained from the electricity days of physics, because modern physics, you could probably, if you agree with me, you can trace it with the discovery of electricity, magnetism, and all of the volt and amps and so on, that the equations that, and the mathematics that came with it, and later on the photographic plates and so on. So it owes it, and it's those equations that things have been built on as more and more radiation, for example, was discovered. And what this law says, and everybody agrees with everybody, I'm not making this up, you probably know this already, this idiotic fundamental law in physics says the following: electrons are negatively charged and they repel one another. Protons are positively charged and they too repel one another. Negative and positive charges are mutually attractive. Right? Nothing could be further than, nothing about this statement is true at all. Right? What follows should be ridiculous. If I'm the idiot, as soon as I start trying to explain it to you, it should be obvious that I'm the idiot here, because how can it be that everybody accepts this, what I've just said to you about the charge theory, as being completely wrong? So let's have a look. What is a charge? What does it actually mean? Can you tell me? It means nothing. You now have to explain the term itself. Because once again, as I said, at some point when electricity, magnetic fields, etc. was discovered, somebody gave it an arbitrary name, and these kind of arbitrary names, most of science is riddled with them, with Greek or Latin terms that provide elitists and territoriality, and to stop, I guess, mere mortals from treading where geniuses roam. These terms mean nothing, and they need further explanation to be understood. They're not just straight away that if you said a term that you would understand what that thing was. So negative and positive charges are the muddy boots of electricity and electromagnetism, the start of modern physics, etc., and the beginning of all of the problem, and they really mean nothing. So let us begin at the beginning. The universe is made up of just two primary entities, the proton and the electron. I've shown you that in the first video, and we'll come across them many times before, but I think that's a fairly reasonable assumption to make, because it's through fusion that we manufacture photons and neutrons, and therefore that's a perfectly reasonable place to begin, that is the first primary reaction, the congregation of hydrogen atoms. Look up at the heavens like Newton did, or any reasonable physicist, natural philosopher might do. What do you see? If you take a moment and just do this mind experiment, what do you see? I believe you probably agree with me that you see the following. Before we go there, I just want to make what should be really obvious, but it isn't. And I'm sorry to make it, but I think it's worth making. If our conclusions defy reality and give us idiotic, magical answers, we should blame our methods, not accuse the universe of being mysterious and illogical. Now that sounds perfectly reasonable, does it not? But yet, this is exactly the opposite of what the quantum physicists believe. They don't care about reality. They don't care about rationality. The only thing they care about is mathematics and what equations regurgitate. So if you look up, you see at least two primary events in the universe. One that is stationary relative to the others, like a star. It's just sitting there in space. Although, yes, it's moving because galaxies are moving, etc. Forget that for now. But looking at relativity from your perspective, there is a thing that is stationary. And there are other things that move. It's satellites. They move around it. They move all over the place. And of course, some of the things move very freely at the speed of light, and we call those photons or electromagnetism. My point here is just to show you that there are just two events. An event that moves, or an event that makes things move, and the event that is stationary. Right? Where do they come from? What is the essence of this particular thing? If you can think of something else, don't watch the rest of the videos. Just throw it away. But my point is that in essence, just two entities. Since all events are congregations of hydrogen atoms, I showed you that before, and hopefully you agree with me partially at least, then we should be able to see two entities. One is perpetual motion, and the other is its exact opposite, or anti-motion. I call it anti-motion because it is the thing that denatures motion. If perpetual motion is meant to be perpetually moving in a straight line, if you trap it, if you provide it with a stationary point, then you have denatured it. You have killed it, basically, in essence. So it is perfectly reasonable to call the other thing anti-motion. If one is perpetual motion, then the other thing is anti-motion. Look again at the evolution of gravity. Then in the next video, it's about gravity. You'll see it in far more detail. But just look. Let's look at least the path of hydrogen condensation. You've seen this video already. I said all atoms are rearrangements of hydrogen atoms. Here's an electron, proton, hydrogen atom. The protons are still here, electrons there, more protons here. Remember, neutrons are just modified protons. So basically a bigger hydrogen atom made up of all of these atoms. So it's a bigger hydrogen atom, etc., etc., etc. All of them are nothing but basically hydrogen atoms. So if we have a motion, the best place to look for those two entities that I just mentioned, perpetual motion and perpetual anti-motion, where do you find it? Right here. It is the proton that provides the stationary point and traps the electron. We'll see this in a minute. The electron is not attracted to the proton. Only a madman would believe that you could have this arrangement if the two are mutually attractive. But anyway, you'll see in a minute. But for now, all I'm trying to show you is that there is a thing that sits in the middle and doesn't move, and there is a thing that moves, just like everything else that you see in the universe. The real relativity is the electron food chain. So, in other words, things that are going that way, as they are becoming, this way we get more prey, this way get more predation, or predators. So here we have electron rich going that way. Here we go proton rich. They are more stationary, more fat, big, or whatever you want to call them. Anti-motion denatures motion and traps it. It provides a stationary point for it, just like the proton does to the electron. Since everything is made up of the hydrogen atom, at any size or shape relative to one another, the exact same principles apply. The proton-rich element will trap the electron-rich element. So anti-motion comes from proton-neutron content. Remember, neutron is just a modified proton. So that's where the anti-motion part of what we observe comes from. Motion wave comes from the photon-electron bit, because remember, the electron is what then gives rise to the photon during the fusion. So photons are manufactured from this point. They are the exact opposites and can never be interchangeable. So now that you see what their nature is, what they do, you cannot accept that mass and energy could be interchangeable, because they are the exact opposite of one another. How could something that denatures motion be itself motion? If you could accept such a thing, then all the logic, all the laws of logic that you base your reality on would crumble, because it and the opposite of it can never be the same at the same time. That just takes away totally, we will have nothing to reason with if that was the case. So now I believe we have something meaningful to say about charges, motion rich and motion poor. Motion rich being what they would call the negative side, and motion poor is the positive side. But again, as you can see, positive negatives mean nothing. But if I said to you motion rich and motion poor, immediately that means something. So let's now, having established the background for that, let's look at the charges. Like charges repel each other. Do they really? Now look at this. This is the preferred state of the hydrogen atom. If you have two hydrogen atoms, they would much rather be as H2 gas. That's on Earth, by the way, because it's a bit different in space. But on Earth, they prefer to be in this state. Now, why would that be the case if two electrons repel one another and the two protons also repel one another? So you have two negative elements here that for some reason are much more stable than when they're apart. If the light charge theory is true, then you would expect the two atoms to be the preferred state, but they're not. I know it's bodged up mathematically. They have the attraction between these two is greater than repulsion, but that's not true. But for now, at least, there should be some doubt in your mind that that may not be the case. And I'll show you some more. Protons do not repel each other. They cannot. Since we agreed that they're anti-motion, they cannot move, then how could they possibly repel each other? How can they move? They can't move. Something else must move them. And you'll see that clearly in the electroscope experiment later when we see them. So atomic nuclei show covalent bonding of protons, making neutrons. We've just seen this. That's the only explanation where the proton and the neutron can actually exist. They must share an electron that binds them. They have no affinity for one another, but they certainly do not repel one another, or nuclei would not be possible. Gravity is the ratio of protons, neutrons, and the electron-photon content of any event. So it's not just the number of protons and neutrons. It depends on also how much of this other thing they have. It is a ratio of the two. Again, I will justify it much more as we go along, but for now, just accept that that could be the case. So gravity increases, the number of protons increase. The whole thing becomes just a bigger congregation of hydrogen atoms. Therefore, protons are additive, not repelling to each other. What am I trying to say here? Again, like I said, because we've already explained the bigger and bigger hydrogen atoms, my point is this, that if you have one hydrogen atom, this, by the way, is trying to show you the different force field. So you can imagine the proton is a force field here, and the force diminishes as you go out from the proton. These are arbitrarily drawn. They don't really mean anything, but for the sake of argument, let's say that this is the ground state where the electron would be in relationship to the proton. These would be the excited states. So when more and more energy is added, the electron can acquire escape energy and move out. My point is that the proton itself is a force field, and it is quantized, meaning it becomes less as the distance increases and then stops completely at a given point. So if you have one proton that is got, say, I don't know, 1 centimeter distance, if you have two of them, that will be 2 centimeters, put three, that will become 3 centimeters, and therefore the whole thing just grows. It becomes a bigger proton because the nucleus grows. So therefore, when you have a lump of rock, that is exactly the same as the hydrogen atom. It just has a bigger gravitational field, if you like, because that is this field. Remember, no affinity. Protons don't have any affinity with one another, but they need glue. And when they bond with one another, although they have no affinity, they grow in size. So in other words, they actually, well, it's the opposite of really repelling one another. They support each other, let's say that. So it just becomes a bigger atom. Electrons are negatively charged and they repel each other. That's another thing. That was the first one, that the positive charges repel one another. As I've shown you, that cannot be, because the force of protons and neutrons is additive. Now we're saying that the electrons are negatively charged, they repel one another. That's rubbish. First of all, like I said, look at the formation of hydrogen atom. That's not possible. Why would they two that repel one another, the electronic clouds, would then form preferentially this hydrogen molecule. But also, this is the most important part, which is, I think, really something that you should spend a moment and think about it. Electrons show interference patterns. Even a single electron or a bunch of electrons in the two-hole experiments show interference patterns. If you were a poet and you wanted to write a poem in physics, you couldn't think of a better word for love than interference pattern, where two things combine and become one and double up and support one another. So electrons combine and increase in intensity. That is not possible. No logic in the world could accept that these two are repelling to one another, that repelling forces would combine and increase in magnitude. So why do we see repelling behavior? Yes, we see repelling behavior, and I'll try and explain it, but why do we see it then? If I am right and positives and negatives do not repel one another. No, protons and neutrons do not move. They have to be moved by photons. We agreed that they are anti-motion, so that you must bear that in mind. I'm not saying you have to agree with it, but that's what I'm saying. So I have to be consistent in my explanation that they don't move. Electrons and photons show repulsion only if the direction of motion is opposing. That's where the problem lies, because when they were looking at negative charges, they didn't look. They used mathematics instead of looking, and therefore they came up with a generalized statement which is not true. The statement is partially true. Electrons will repel one another when the direction of motion is opposing. More meaningless garbage here. I'm using this other magnet to show you the magnetic field, but what is north and south? Again, more garbage that doesn't mean anything. Now look, when do negative charges show repulsion? They show repulsion when this happens. And please take a moment, because this is very important. Look at the direction of the cloud. The best way to visualize what a magnet is to think of it, I'm just trying to give you a visual example. Think of it as something that produces smoke. It sucks air from this end and produces smoke. Because there's a vacuum there, the smoke goes round and it keeps going back, and it keeps going round and round. It's like a self-propelling engine. It works. That's what a magnet is, because it's been solidified at an unstable stage, and that's why it has a perpetual motion. At the north end, or where the motion rich is, look at the motion. This is pouring out, well, essentially electrons, if you like, because they're all the same. But and it's going to the motion poor end, which is the positive side, back into the system. Motion rich, motion poor, because the motion goes back. This is producing more motion. If you bring these two now look where the arrows are, what would you expect? These are both facing one another, and therefore they will repel one another, obviously. Now if you turn the magnet round, what happens? They will rush towards one another, and smack bang in the middle they will be attracted. Why? Because look at, again, the direction of the motion. Here's the motion poor, this keeps going in, this one is producing it, so therefore it can go straight into that system. And that's why, although these are all electrons here, and these are electrons here, this is positive, doesn't mean anything, by the way, because that's why I said to you that it's completely nonsense, and later you'll see it. It's actually all to do with the motion wave, or the electron photon, because if their directions are the same, like trains and locomotives, if they're going in one direction, they will support each other and pull each other. If it's the opposite, they will crash. So in this case, because the directions are now aligned in the right way, they will attract one another. And here's the thing that will show you, hopefully, quite clearly, this nonsense about the positive charges repelling, because they can't. The key test for repulsion theory is deeply flawed. If you look at the electroscope, and first you introduce a negative charge, meaning this plastic rod is full of motion wave, or charge, in this particular case means electrons and photons, which are, by the way, the same thing. You'll see in a minute. What would you expect it to happen? So it pushes it down here, and look at the vector forces. In other words, these two blades, if you like, become saturated with this magnetic type of motion here, and because they're facing one another, they will repel one another. They will push each other apart, because their directions again are being opposed. Because look, if you just push it down here, That's what will happen. I've shown you the direction of the vector forces. Now what happens if you do the opposite? Now you put a glass rod, now you're sucking the electronic cloud, if you like, out of the system. What will you get? You get exactly the same. You're now sucking the electronic cloud up from here. The positive has nothing to do with it. You're still looking at these negative, sorry, the electronic cloud itself. Now it's going in the other direction, but again pushing each other apart because they are saturated now at this end. It still has to do with the electronic clouds. It has nothing to do with a positive charge. The protons play no role here. You're just simply reversing the motion of the charges or the electron going down or up from here. So if you do not understand the cloud nature of photons, see the particle wave duality nonsense in another video. But again, like I said, I can't put them all together in one place because it would be way too much and too complicated. But my point here is simply to show you that there's a repulsion that you see, whether it's negative or positive charges, is due to exactly the same principle here of the waves opposing one another and pushing each other. It has nothing to do with the protons. It's still to do everything with electrons. So again, if you need a complete and systematic explanation, please get this book. I've said this before, it's completely free as a Kindle ebook, and I don't want anything from you. It may help you to make up your own mind, because if no matter what it is that you're studying, your field in science, if it's not firmly based in physics, then with all due respect, it's nothing. At best, it's just lucky guesswork. But it has to be, because it is the law of physics that makes up our reality.